East Coast. So there's a sort of technological barrier that the European projects are now starting to do floating wind, and that's where people start saying, oh, there's an opportunity to really start looking at the West Coast where you need that kind of technology. So the first projects on the West Coast were looking to be down in the sort of Central Coast area where the wind isn't quite as good, but there's better power infrastructure, better grid capacity to tie something in. And obviously there's a lot more customers and load down there, so it's a good fit. And so there's been a lot of interest from the federal and state government to start trying to see the West Coast, and particularly California, move forward with offshore wind. And everyone thought that Central Coast was going to be the place to do it. And then the Navy came out with a map that said, well, we're not so sure about this offshore wind thing in certain areas where we've got submarines and boats. And so they just, basically they said red means no offshore wind, the blue areas are protected areas. And then yellow and green are where they said, well, that's where we would like to see offshore wind. So down here is where they were looking to do the first projects in California, right in the middle of that red zone where the Navy said, I don't think so. And so that kind of, everyone took a step back and said, all right, well, let's try to work through those issues. They've got, legitimate concerns. Obviously, people want to support military readiness, and they just have a lot of stuff going on down in the ocean down there. And so that really caused people to start saying, well, we know the wind's good up there, and so what about this green area where there's actually some potential? And so we've really seen the state and the industry kind of move towards saying, well, okay, maybe the first thing that happens in California is actually going to be up in Humboldt County, off the Humboldt Coast. And so that's an exciting opportunity for us. I think our grid transmission constraint issues sort of temper the enthusiasm because there's a limit to how big a project you could do compared to areas with better grid infrastructure. And so farther down the road, there might be the opportunity to upgrade that infrastructure to accommodate a larger commercial type market up here. But for now, the kind of the first step, and it's probably appropriate to do something small to start since this hasn't been done on the West Coast. And it is a newer technology as far as the floating platform piece of it, and so kind of incrementally moving forward with something that's a manageable first step, probably makes some sense, and then see where it goes from there. So as far as the technology, just talking about floating wind turbines, these are just some examples of different styles or designs. The first commercial project in Scotland is using this one. There's a project in Portugal that we're going to be working with some guys, and I'll talk more about this, that are using this technology. There's some other ones that where it's like a tension platform. All this is kind of sort of adapted from the offshore oil and gas sector. And so, when people say, oh, we got to build some big floating thing in the water, well, the guys that have expertise in doing that are typically oil and gas companies. And so they've been taking best practices and lessons learned from that technology and scaling it to doing these kinds of wind projects. And so, those are some different designs. This one, so, here's a photograph. So it's not science fiction. That's a real wind turbine in real ocean off the coast of Portugal. And so, that's basically underwater. Okay, it's an ad on me. Well, I'll speed up the conversation. So that's what it looks like underwater. It's this sort of shallow draft technology. And that's a good fit for Humboldt because basically you can do the assembly, in the harbor, put it all together. It's fairly shallow. You can just tugboat it out to sea and connect it to, basically there's a giant underwater cable that's buried beneath the seafloor that goes out to wherever your project is. And so you can bring these in and out for maintenance, for deployment, using conventional tugs, and it's got a fairly shallow draft, so you can move it in and out of the harbor. And so that's where this style of platform is a good fit for our area. And to that end, we just did a request for qualifications for development partners. So we were looking at this, and it became clear that this was a good opportunity, and there was a lot of state interest in Humboldt maybe being a place to do this. Obviously, we don't have the capacity to do hundreds of millions of dollars offshore wind projects single-handedly. And so we issued a request for qualifications to identify partners that would want to really engage us on a community-driven process. So we framed it as a public-private partnership opportunity to do this in a way that would really be sort of driven by community priorities, making sure that we're minimizing impacts to the commercial fishing industry, minimizing environmental impacts, doing it with really a community focus. So we put it out there, and we got a number of responses. I won't go through all the responses, but actually tonight at after this, I'm going to our RCEA board meeting where they'll be considering, accepting the recommendation of our review team, which selected one of these teams. And the team that was recommended by our review team, again, this is sort of hot off the presses, so the outcome of today's meeting is not known, but this team was highly ranked by the review group that we had, which was folks from across different sectors in the community. And it's made up of a company called Principal Power, who are the ones that build that yellow platform, so that's their design. This is their unit, which was their first pilot project off the coast of Portugal. Acker Solutions, which is like a Norwegian-based company, and they're all around the world, that does undersea cables and floating platforms, and so they're good at building crazy things in the ocean, basically. EDP Renewables is a renewable project developer. They're based in Portugal, but they've got projects around the country. I accidentally visited one of their wind farms in Indiana when I was visiting a cousin. They took me on a tour of a wind farm because they knew I was an energy guy, and said, oh, let's go check out our local wind farm. And then when I got back, I was like, wait a minute. When I was looking at the proposals, I'm like, those are the guys whose wind farm I visited in October. So they're a owner-developer of wind projects. H.G. Harvey Associates are local consultants that do environmental work, and then Herrera Environmental Consultants are also another consulting firm that specifically has done a lot of work with offshore wind. And so that was kind of the winning team. I will say we got a very strong response on the developer side of it, so we kind of asked for different skill areas. And on the developer side of it, we had 5 proposals, including this one, which had sort of a large Portuguese developer, parent company in Portugal. The other 4, we had Norway, we had Denmark, we had France, and we had Germany. And these are all companies that have hundreds of megawatts of wind and offshore wind, and have balance sheets in the billions of dollars that are doing big energy projects in Europe. So they're not like small fly-by-night companies. And so we were pretty impressed by that response, and I think it really showed the level that the industry is interested in doing something up here and sees an opportunity. And I think the fact that they're all European companies reflects the fact that that's who has experience doing offshore wind projects and feels comfortable saying, yeah, let's propose something that was actually going to be viable, because there again isn't that market in the U.S. yet. So the big players in offshore wind are European energy companies, and a lot of them have roots in the oil and gas industry because they know how to build stuff in the ocean, and then they moved into the renewable energy space. So again, this is not even hot off the press. It's going to the printer tonight at the meeting, and we'll see if my board approves us moving forward with negotiating a partnership agreement with this team. And I think the other thing I'll just mention is that it's not like all those other companies are necessarily just going to disappear or not be interested in Humboldt. I think we're looking at, again, that sort of first project to move things forward. Of course. And there might be a bigger market opportunity as the West Coast market develops, and so I think we want to kind of cultivate as many relationships as we can there. As far as the port piece of it, there's actually been assessments by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, which is a federal agency that does offshore federal water leasing, including offshore wind leases. And basically their assessment is the same as what our opinion was, that Humboldt Bay has pretty good bones. It's got the right features for supporting this on the West Coast. It's deep harbor. One of the big things for these is there's no bridges to get out of the harbor, so like these things could be hundreds of feet tall, so you can't get them under the Golden Gate Bridge. And so it's like, okay, there's a whole area that's not going to happen. And so the Bowen basically said they've got all the right characteristics. The things that we don't have is we don't have docks that have the weight bearing capacity and the ability to move around these giant 100-ton pieces of equipment to assemble them. And so there's definitely a need for dock upgrades, but overall the federal assessment was like, oh, it's a pretty good place to do this, and the state's interested as well. In kind of helping explore that as the potential for Humboldt to be a hub for this kind of work. Initially, again, to manage expectations or where we're at in the process, this is very early on. If we're talking about an initial project that's maybe 10, 12 of these turbines, so he's not going to build a manufacturing facility on the West Coast when that's the only project happening on the West Coast. So, initially this would be more assembling components, putting it all together, and then on the long term, the maintenance piece of it, when something breaks or needs repaired or be cleaned or whatever, you can bring these in and do that work in the harbor and then bring them back out. And so the initial potential would really be more around, the assembly maintenance piece of it, which would still be, I think an exciting opportunity. In the long term, if we're kind of the first to get moving and, and we kind of, work to establish this as a hub, going back to that map of, where the resource is, we're right in the middle of the West Coast, we're right in the middle of the best wind resource in the West Coast. So there's a potential to be a hub for that kind of work on the West Coast if we, can position ourselves right and kind of move in that direction. As far as kind of the needs of the harbor, one thing, most of the stuff is, giant components that move around by ship. So just as an illustration, here's a bunch of wind and power components that are heading somewhere to be assembled. And so, from just to add visuals to it, what we would be seeing in that early stages would be this kind of stuff coming from wherever it's being manufactured in Europe or Asia. And then, some manner of assembly where you've got some staging. This is a big offshore wind staging area in Europe. We wouldn't be that big probably initially, but where you bring in the components and then you're putting these things together and fixing them onto the platform, maybe fabricating the platform from components brought in, and that kind of work would be what could potentially be happening here in Humboldt down the road. And so, kind of next steps, we're going to be, hopefully, if my board approves, working with those guys, we'll be entering into some kind of partnership agreement with them to move forward. A first step is putting in a federal lease application to the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, who are the ones that basically run that process. And that's a potentially multi-year kind of process, depending on different decision points. That can take a while. But getting that in, so it starts the clock ticking on moving things forward is a key piece. Interconnecting into the grid, that takes again another multi-year study to figure out how much we can actually put on the local grid. So moving that forward is another next step. And then looking at kind of the port infrastructure is a component of all that to figure out where does it make sense to where might staging be done? What are the needs? What are areas where there's going to need to be upgrades? What are those upgrades going to cost? Figuring that out are all kind of early next steps. And a lot of this, particularly the lease application part of it, is going to be well, I don't have on here, which by the most important one is engaging local stakeholders, particularly commercial fishing, but the whole community in general to get input on this process and make sure that things are moving along in the best way possible and in a way that minimizes impacts. As far as what those impacts are, we're talking like 20 miles or so out to sea, so pretty far from the shore, so not big visual impacts. It's not like they're moving over your beach or something. And then that gets out of, that's past where there's crab fishing, but there still is fishing out, that far, certainly. And so, managing mitigating those impacts is an important part of the process. But is, I think we're starting to just move through that, and certainly talking with the fishing community and others to help get their input early in the process, not later on when they feel like they didn't have input in the early decision making. So that's kind of the overview. I think I'm about all the time. I'm happy to answer questions. I figured if I had more questions than you want, this is the meeting ever. So. Okay.
Is having them here and manufacturing them here?
What's that?
Is having them here and manufacturing them here?
Well, so the manufacturing part would have to be, that would be a later phase. Because if you're only doing 10, you're not going to have a whole wind blade, manufacturing facility just for 10 turbines. So assembly would be an option of like putting all the pieces together, like in this picture. But as far as the actual manufacturing, that could be down the road. And that's something again that happens in Europe, or even I used to be in Denver for a bit, and one of the big international wind companies opened a manufacturing facility in Colorado because there was a big enough market, basically for onshore, obviously, where they said, okay, let's put in a factory in Colorado that can then service that market. So I think if the West Coast overall starts to actually take off, even if it's not taking off just here in Humboldt, but you start seeing a real industry grow up, that's where the sort of supply chain starts to develop. And it's starting to happen on the East Coast now. I'm going to a conference next week that's a lot about that. So kind of listening to how they're doing it and where they're at in the process on the East Coast. But eventually, if that market develops, then that's where you can actually start having more manufacturing of these components.
So we're in the blue, dark blue zone, so one turbine would generate how much power?
Yeah, so the offshore turbines are much larger than the land-based ones because you don't have the limitation of trying to move things around on trains and trucks and on roads. You know, the ocean's big, so they're much larger in scale. And so we're kind of looking at something maybe in like the 100, 120 megawatt range, which would be maybe 10 or 12 of these gigantic turbines, which would be similar in like nameplate capacity to like the PG&E natural gas power plant, in Salmon. So pretty big. That would be a big chunk of like our local electricity load. Tens of thousands of households scale size.
Just a follow-up. So what needs to be done for the infrastructure? What's the export status?
Yeah, so we're going to be working with PG&E and Humboldt State University, the Shot Center Research Center, to basically assess, what that would require. And so, again, we're kind of looking at a first project, trying to fit in what we can without having to upgrade transmission to the, Central Valley. So, I think they're going to be looking at options of, upgrading, one of the existing connections to the north part of the Central Valley. Or potentially, the thing that they're going to run the numbers for is running actually an undersea transmission cable. So instead of going over the land, going down, and connecting to the Bay Area where there's load and customer base. And so they're going to kind of be costing out and estimating, what would that take, what would the costs be, how big a project would you need to do to make it, feasible to pay for that kind of an upgrade. So that's one of the things we'll be looking at next year.
Can any of that be piggybacked with the fiber optic stuff that's being planned for the valley?
Potentially, I think it would probably be using their existing power line right-of-ways and just reconduct every one of those so that it's not adding a new power line, a new right-of-way, which would be a lot harder for PG&E to implement. So I think it would be most likely just the one that goes over to Cottonwood, kind of 36 would just be okay, let's just make that a bigger line.
Last year, about this time when I was in Europe for 5 weeks, I was in over a dozen ports in Spain, Portugal, France along the Rhine too, and Denmark and then southern England in the Portsmouth area. And there wasn't one port that I was in that did not have turbines at the port itself and surrounding the port. I didn't see any of the offshore ones there, but it was ubiquitous there. And that technology, of course, didn't have to be used there. This is kind of directed to the Harbor District. Where does this fit in with Harbor District's plans, and how does the fishing community feel about this? What concerns might they have?
I'm one of those guys.
Yes, you are.
There'll be some concerns, I'm sure, but I also expect the infrastructure changes to be a benefit as well, so we have to talk about it.
I would say, I'm only one, but I would say the Harbor District's been consistently supportive of this type of project. It's the matters, details are what matter. And my question is, what kind on the East Coast, most of that's in state waters, or is that federal waters?
I think it's mostly federal, but it might be a mix of both, but primarily federal, I believe.
What kind of leasing, or there's got to be some snafus in leasing?
Yeah, there's two lease sort of pathways for offshore wind, and there's a specific offshore wind leasing process that they have. One of them is where they'll do a bunch of work and assessment and do their thing, and say, okay, we identified these areas, and they'll pick out some blocks, and then they'll put that out to auction and say who wants to do that. They have another pathway where basically any credible entity that can prove that they're able to do this kind of a project can submit what's called an unsolicited lease request and say, hey, we identified an area where we want to do a project where there isn't an existing lease, and you can basically request that. Then they say, okay, they'll see if there's competitive interest for that process. If there isn't, then you can move forward with doing a lease. If there is competitive interest expressed, then they'll do a similar auction for that area that you identified. And so the goal we have is to submit with these partners an unsolicited lease request in an area that we identify, rather than waiting for the federal and state government to do whatever they're going to do to decide where they think it should be up here. We figure we could, work through that locally and identify a spot, and talk to fishermen and say, hey, do you want to here, which is the least bad spot, and make that decision locally much quicker than waiting for Washington D.C. and Sacramento to kind of work through the gears of doing that. So it's still kind of they've gone through a number of these rounds on the East Coast. They were kind of focusing all their efforts again on the central coast of California, and somebody kicked it off really because somebody did an unsolicited lease request down in the central coast, and so that kind of kick-started things in California. Actually, Principal Power has a lease up in Oregon for a project they were looking at that sort of stalled out because there was nobody to buy the electricity, and it was, well, I won't go into all the details, but it wasn't for technical reasons. And then there's been some activity in Hawaii as well. So, yeah.
Are there federal loan guarantees to help reduce the cost of financing?
Yeah, that's one of the things. So there's a number of different options for that. And we actually, RCEA has access to as a rural electric utility, they have a low interest loan program to support infrastructure projects. Now this would be pretty outside of the box of the typical stuff they do. But there's some programs there, and I think also a lot of the companies, and for example, there's the initial stages of this would probably be sort of balance sheet financed by these developers, is how they typically do their projects. So they, again, these are companies that have the billions of dollars to say, all right, we'll chunk down the X million to get it to that stage of then going out and getting financing. So there's a number of options that we might pursue when we get to that stage of actually putting it together. But again, the folks we're working with, I'm not an expert at building multi-million-dollar wind projects, but we've got folks that stepped up that really are. So over here.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah, me first. What are the projected financial and employment benefits to this area if this does go through?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think it's too soon for me to make a definitive statement on that. I don't think it's going to be thousands and thousands of jobs. The cost of the project would certainly be in the millions. And again, obviously doing this isn't the kind of dock that is necessary. This is an existing dock in Portugal they use, but doing upgrades would cost money. There would be sort of the building fabrication stage, which might have a flurry of jobs. When you're putting the first project together. I think the longer term potential would be for the maintenance operations piece of it, where there's people that are tending the farm, so to speak, over the long run, and then as things through. I think if you've got a dock here and you've got an assembly facility, obviously you wouldn't want to just then be done with it. So if there was other projects, tapping into that. So one of the things, and this is where I don't want to throw out numbers that haven't really been run through the mill yet, but actually one of the proposals, like these guys' proposal, that they looked at different options where it might be a little bit cheaper to do some of the work somewhere else, bring things here versus assembly here, but they said we would want to work with the community to identify, and that's where on the power buying side we might say, well, we're willing to pay a little bit more for the electricity if we're going to have more of the jobs be local, and kind of which stages of the process are done locally. So it's a big effort, so it's not going to be a gazillion jobs, but it's certainly it's not like a crew of 5 guys are going to pull that together either. So.
Question here.
I was just going to ask you, apparently these are fully assembled rather than like they do in Louisiana or on Bayou Black and places like that. They assemble parts, float it out to the ocean, flood it.
Yeah, so their approach is basically, they assemble a platform somewhere, by itself, so the yellow piece of that, and that might be a piece that could be done here locally, where okay, they've got these fabricated tubes that are made in some factory that makes giant metal tubes, but actually the assembly of those pieces could be done here or could be done somewhere else, and then the components of the tower and the hub and the blades are then put together on site. So a situation like this where you're like, okay, you build a tower, you attach the blades, and so they're one of the nice parts about their design is that basically put that platform together somewhere, you get it in the water, and then you build this turbine, quayside on top of that platform, and then you tugboat that whole thing out. That's them dragging it out and getting it in position with some boats in Portugal. So you can move the whole thing in and out, and it's ballasted so they can unballast it so it's got a shallow draft, and when it gets out of place they can sink it down and stabilize it. And it's basically got like anchor, 3 anchor cables.
That pier you showed, is that the 500-ton pier that I read about? Do you envision one of those at Humboldt Bay?
Yes, I don't. So the sort of the shape of this is not like a requirement for this kind of a project. This is an existing pier that they used in Portugal for this pilot. So there would definitely need to be a fairly big area to stage, these gigantic blades and those components, and then you need something that had the weight-bearing, ability to lift up, that chunk on the top, the 500-ton kind of thing that needs, a crane and something to place it on there.
Tell us the size of the.
Oh, yes. So these offshore ones, can be from the base to the very tip of the blade to the highest point can be like 700 plus feet. And so the reference point I always use is the old smokestack out there is like 305 feet or something like that. And so if you think of the tower would be about the size of the smokestack, and then imagine sticking another one of those on it and spinning it around. And so that piece of it would be a little bit taller potentially than the Humboldt smokestack. I think you have to.
How much acreage will be needed to set up a project like that?
Good question, and I don't have the answer to that. That's one of the things I will say. The first thing that when all these companies came up here to look at this stuff, they sort of said, I'm going to go around and take a look at what's here, and then they said, oh, this dock's not going to be strong enough, but I see where we can do it. So I don't have an exact number. That's one of the things that they're going to be, in that early evaluation. I mean, they've looked at it and obviously found that, there's the potential. They didn't just say, oh, let's start moving this forward without even considering that. So I don't have an exact number of, what acreage would be needed, and that would also depend on how much of like the fabrication they're doing here versus just a final assembly.
Is there a range like from 50 to 200 acres, or do you have any idea?
Yeah, it wouldn't necessarily have to be huge. I mean, you need enough space to kind of like stay there. This is a bigger farm than what we would be starting with. Although I think also if they're going to do something, they'd like to do it in a way that could support future projects. And so think something like this. Yeah.
What political entities have to have a say in whether this happens or not?
Pretty much everyone that exists, I would say.
There's only 17 agencies. It's very easy to get through.
Yeah, it's primarily in federal waters, but then you're obviously crossing, state waters, and you're going on the shore with the cables, and then if you're connected to the grid, there's a whole slew of, agencies that are involved with that at the state level. So there's a lot of pieces to that, puzzle of it. I would say there is really strong federal and state support right now, and so the California Energy Commission, the Ocean Protection Council of California, and then the Federal Bureau of Ocean Energy Management are really trying to move this along in California, and they're coming up to visit us and setting up meetings. They invited me to come to a meeting when I'm at this conference thing next week with the director of the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. He's the guy that runs the whole agency, and so they're taking us seriously up here, and so that's a good sign as far as not having roadblocks thrown up, but it does take pretty much everybody that's going to have to sign off on it. That's going to have to sign off.
Well, what about Board of Supervisors, city councils, groups like that? Do they have to approve it also?
It would depend on, if we're coming ashore somewhere, there can be issues with that. I'm not too worried about that in the sense that so far locally, we've seen a pretty strong amount of local interest in this, because it's hey, it's renewable energy, it's something that could be good for the economy as well, and as long as we can not kill whales and put fishermen out of business, and I think we can do that, then it's got some good potential. Yeah.
Since you'll be generating a similar amount of energy that is being created right now, is there going to be some incentive for PG&E to maintain the infrastructure they have?
Yeah, so PG&E gets they've got a good deal in that they're a regulated monopoly, so they get paid no matter what. So it's you know, they're not going to be like, oh, we're not going to be, certainly on the power line infrastructure part of it, that's something that they just get funded, and it's it is what it is. It's not impacted by where the generation is happening. As far as the power plant, there's mechanisms that basically, you know, ensure that they're operating for reliability and they recover their costs as part of that. So it's not like we can put the PG&E power plant out of business by doing this. And actually, PG&E's, you know, again, a good partner on this effort, and they've been very interested in the potential of a project like this. Again, you know, early in the stages, but the response we've gotten from PG&E has been very positive. They actually kind of designed that plan both to meet local loads, but also with the flexibility. So they, you know, they kind of had this vision of, hey, we're trying to do more renewable energy. It's designed in a way where, you know, if there's lots of wind blowing, it can ramp down. If the wind goes away, they can ramp up. And so there's state level mechanisms to make sure that they, you know, get compensated for providing reliability.
Will our bills go down?
Was that?
Will our bills go down?
You know, that's a good question. It's probably not from the first project. It's probably going to be more expensive than conventional power, and so that's where I think, you know, I don't think RCEA is going to be the only like off-taker. You know, we'll be looking at other entities to kind of take a bite of that. But you know, I think one thing I'll say is, you know, your bills aren't going to go up because of it, because I don't want to come back here and say, hey guys, your bills are going up because of this cool project. So I think, you know, one of our key guides is to work with PG&E to make sure that rates are you know, that we're providing lower rates than what people would have through just the conventional PG&E mix.
Question back.
Yeah.
The question is leading a little bit more detail on the timing, but coming from the job perspective, it's going to create jobs, but we want to make sure that it's our people who are being employed. So to try to coordinate in terms of training our workforce, how much lead time do you anticipate?
So the good and bad news is lots of lead time is available. So it's probably like a 7-year process. You know, say we're all right. Today's, you know, day one, because again that just getting the lease and getting site control can take 1 to 2 years before you really actually, you know, can start spending money on you know, some of the bigger analysis part. And so, you know, you're not going to really dive in until you actually have that site control and know that you can put a project in. And so, you know, there's going to be at least a year or two probably lead up to that, and then, you know, another, let's say 5 years of getting to, you know, another couple years before you get to the construction stage, you know, and actually start doing stuff. So with that in mind, I think that's where the good news is that gives us time to work with, you know, whoever's doing the work and identify, you know, opportunities to say, okay, which of these jobs, you know, can we train people up for, you know, and maybe having, you know, I always like, you know, sort of on-the-job training type programs rather than saying, oh, we're going to need, I think, this number of jobs, let's train 30 people to be, you know, whatever technicians, and then it turns out, well, they only needed 5, and so then we just train 25 people to do something that we didn't, you know, have a spot for them. You know, I don't think we're not going to have an underwater welding specialist just say, oh yeah, there's an ad in the local paper, you know, but you know, if we can find somebody that has the right skills, you know, there's the opportunity to work with some of these companies. And that was something we specifically asked them to address